Charlie Sheen was once the highest-paid actor on American television, earning close to $2 million an episode at the peak of his career. But behind that success was a personal life so chaotic it produced a Christmas Day arrest, a knife held to a wife's throat, a hospital room shared with a porn star, and three marriages that each ended in headlines nobody could look away from. This is the real story of Charlie Sheen and the three women who married him. A Hollywood kid with a head start on trouble. Charlie Sheen was born Carlos Erwin Estevez on September 3, 1965, the son of actor Martin Sheen and the younger brother of actor Emilio Estevez, growing up in a household already deeply embedded in the entertainment industry. That kind of built-in access gave Charlie an early foothold in the business, and by his teenage years, he was already appearing in small film roles, a head start that would carry him into major stardom well before most actors of his generation had even gotten their first real break. Growing up as the son of one of Hollywood's most respected and politically outspoken actors came with its own particular set of pressures, and those who knew the Estevez family during Charlie's childhood often noted that both he and his older brother Emilio seemed determined from an early age to carve out their own distinct identities within the industry, rather than simply relying on their father's name to open doors for them. Whatever assistance his family background provided, Charlie's raw talent as a performer became apparent quickly enough that he was building a genuinely independent career well before he had reached his 20th birthday. By the mid-1980s, Charlie had become one of the most recognizable young actors in Hollywood, appearing in Oliver Stone's Academy Award-winning war drama Platoon in 1986, a role that showcased real dramatic range and established him as a genuine talent rather than simply a famous name riding on his father's coattails. He followed that success with a string of major films throughout the decade, including a memorable cameo in Ferris Bueller's Day Off and a reunion with Stone 2 years later on Wall Street, projects that cemented his position as one of the most in-demand young leading men in the entire industry. Working with a director as demanding as Oliver Stone left a lasting impression on Charlie, and he later reflected candidly on just how physically and emotionally exhausting those particular productions had been, describing the sense that a person seemed to age noticeably just from the experience of shooting one of Stone's intense, immersive films. That willingness to push himself into genuinely demanding dramatic territory, even as his personal life outside the studio grew increasingly unpredictable, spoke to a level of professional seriousness that would continue to define his career even during his most chaotic personal years. By 1994, that combination of consistent box office success and growing cultural recognition earned Charlie a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, a formal acknowledgement of a career that, even amid his mounting personal controversies, had already produced a genuinely substantial body of respected work. Even as his career accelerated, though, Charlie's personal life was already beginning to generate its own headlines, well before any of his three eventual marriages ever took place. In December of 1984, he became a father for the first time, welcoming a daughter, Cassandra Jade Estevez, with his high school girlfriend, Paula Profit, a relationship that had never progressed to marriage, but that nonetheless connected him to fatherhood at just 19 years old. Then, in January of 1990, an incident occurred that would set the tone for much of how the public would come to view Charlie Sheen for the following 3 decades. While engaged to actress Kelly Preston, Charlie accidentally shot her in the arm, an incident that ended their engagement and generated the kind of tabloid attention that would follow him relentlessly for the rest of his career. Preston herself later described the incident as a genuine accident, explaining that a small revolver Charlie had been carrying in his back pocket had fallen out and discharged, striking her. Charlie, for his part, maintained for years afterward that he had not even been in the room at the time, insisting he had been downstairs making coffee when he heard the gunshot. The incident arrived on the heels of Charlie's starring role in the hit baseball comedy Major League, released just months earlier in 1989, a film that had helped cement his status as a bankable leading man, capable of carrying major studio comedies as easily as he had once carried serious dramatic work for Oliver Stone. That juxtaposition, a rising comedic and dramatic star whose professional momentum kept building even as his personal life produced increasingly alarming headlines, would become something of a defining pattern throughout the remainder of Charlie's career, one where professional success and personal chaos seemed to run on entirely separate, often simultaneous tracks. That single alarming episode, arriving years before he ever walked down the aisle for the first time, offered an early and unmistakable preview of the volatility that would come to define nearly every major relationship in his adult life. The marriage that barely lasted a season. By the mid-1990s, Charlie's reputation as one of Hollywood's most colorful and unpredictable young stars was already well established, a reputation only reinforced when he was publicly named as a client of the notorious Hollywood escort operation run by Heidi Fleiss in 1995. That revelation, arriving in the same general period as his eventual first marriage, only added to the sense that Charlie's personal life operated on a considerably faster and more chaotic timeline than most of his peers within the entertainment industry. It was against that backdrop of scandal and tabloid fascination that Charlie met model Donna Peel while filming a commercial in New York City in July of 1995. The relationship moved with startling speed. After a courtship that lasted only about 6 weeks, Charlie and Donna married in Malibu, California on September 3rd, 1995, his 30th birthday. That choice of wedding date, deliberately aligning the ceremony with his own birthday, reflected the kind of impulsive, all-in romantic energy that seemed to characterize Charlie's approach to relationships throughout much of his younger adult life. In the immediate aftermath of the wedding, Charlie spoke publicly about the marriage in genuinely enthusiastic terms, describing Donna as his best friend and expressing the sense that the two of them had found their soulmates in one another. Language that, given how quickly the entire relationship had unfolded, struck some observers at the time as more a reflection of infatuation than of any deep, tested compatibility between the two of them. Very little was publicly known about Donna Peel herself beyond her modeling career, and unlike Charlie's subsequent two wives, she largely stepped out of the public eye entirely following their divorce, choosing not to remain a recurring presence in tabloid coverage the way both Denise Richards and Brooke Mueller would in the years that followed their own respective marriages to Charlie. That enthusiasm proved to be short-lived. By February of 1996, less than 6 months after the wedding, Charlie announced that he and Donna were divorcing, bringing his first marriage to an end almost as quickly as it had begun. The rapid collapse of the marriage generated its own round of tabloid coverage, given how publicly and enthusiastically Charlie had spoken about the relationship only months earlier. Looking back on the relationship years later, Charlie would acknowledge that he had moved far too quickly into marriage without taking the time to genuinely understand who Donna was as a person. A candid admission that suggested the whirlwind nature of the courtship itself may have been part of what doomed the marriage from the very start. That kind of retrospective honesty, acknowledging his own role in the marriage's swift collapse rather than simply blaming external circumstances, would become something of a recurring theme in how Charlie discussed his failed relationships in later interviews throughout his life. That first, brief marriage would end up setting an unfortunate pattern for the two marriages that followed, each one beginning with genuine hope and public declarations of happiness, and each one eventually unraveling amid circumstances considerably more dramatic and publicly documented than a simple, quiet parting of ways. What happened next? when Charlie met the woman who would become his second wife, would draw him into a relationship that produced two children, years of headline-generating conflict, and one of the most bitter custody battles of his entire life. A second marriage that started with promise. Charlie met actress Denise Richards in the early 2000s, and the two were married on June 15, 2002, a union that, unlike his brief first marriage, appeared to genuinely settle Charlie into a period of domestic stability, at least for a while. Denise, already an established film actress in her own right, brought a level of professional stature and public visibility to the relationship that made the couple genuinely popular subjects of media coverage throughout the early 2000s, a Hollywood pairing that many observers at the time viewed as a promising, more mature chapter following the brief chaos of Charlie's first marriage. Denise had already built a substantial acting career of her own by that point, having appeared in a number of notable film roles throughout the late 1990s, and her career continued running in parallel with her marriage to Charlie throughout the early years of their relationship, even as raising two young daughters together became an increasingly central part of both of their lives. The couple went on to have two daughters together, Sammy, born in 2004, and Lola, born in 2005, and for a period the marriage seemed to represent exactly the kind of grounded family life that had eluded Charlie throughout much of his earlier adult years. Friends and colleagues who observed the couple during this period often remarked on how genuinely settled Charlie appeared during the earliest years of his marriage to Denise, a contrast to the more turbulent public image he had cultivated during his years as a single man in Hollywood. That period of relative calm did not last. In March of 2005, while 7 months pregnant with the couple's second daughter, Denise filed for divorce, a decision that set in motion years of legal conflict between the two of them that would continue long after the divorce itself was finalized. The timing of that filing, arriving so late into a pregnancy, suggested to many observers that whatever tensions had led to the decision had already been building for some time before Denise finally decided to act on them. The court signed off on their divorce in November of 2006, but rather than settling the matter, that legal conclusion marked only the beginning of an extended, often bitterly public custody dispute over their two young daughters. In September of 2007, Denise took the additional step of filing to revoke Charlie's overnight visitation privileges with Sammy and Lola, alleging that he had been engaging in inappropriate behavior online while the girls were in his care, allegations Charlie firmly denied. That particular filing arrived at a notably complicated moment in Charlie's own personal life, coming just 2 months after he had become engaged to Brooke Mueller, the woman who would go on to become his third wife, a timeline that added yet another layer of complexity to an already strained co-parenting relationship between Charlie and Denise. Media coverage at the time frequently noted the awkward overlap between Charlie's ongoing legal battle with his second wife and his rapidly developing new relationship, a pattern of moving quickly from one significant relationship into the next that had, by that point, already characterized much of his adult romantic history, going back to his very first marriage. Over the following years, the two continued cycling in and out of court, with Denise in various divorce filings, alleging that Charlie had returned to drinking and drug use and had, at certain points, become violent, claims that added further tension to an already strained co-parenting relationship. Despite the ongoing legal conflict, the two eventually reached a tentative custody arrangement, granting Charlie supervised visitation once a week with his daughters, and their representatives issued a joint statement expressing hope that they could resolve their remaining differences privately rather than continuing to play out their disputes in the public eye. That hope, however, would prove difficult to fully realize, particularly once Charlie's third marriage began generating its own headline-grabbing crisis that would once again pull Denise and their daughters into the story. even though she was, by that point, no longer his wife at all. The marriage that nearly turned fatal. Even as his divorce and custody battle with Denise Richards continued unfolding in public, Charlie had already moved on to a new relationship, becoming engaged to real estate investor Brooke Mueller in July of 2007. The two married on May 30th, 2008, and by September of that same year, Brooke was pregnant, walking the red carpet at the Emmy Awards alongside her nominated husband while expecting twin sons. Bob and Max Sheen were born on March 15th, 2009, and for a brief period, Charlie's representatives described him publicly as a devoted family man, now father to 3 daughters and 2 sons. That description, painting a picture of a man who had finally settled into stable, contented fatherhood across 2 separate families, reflected the genuine optimism surrounding the marriage during its earliest months. Charlie himself had spoken warmly about Brooke around the time of their engagement, describing her as easy, loving, and smart, and suggesting that her presence in his life had brought him closer to genuine happiness than he had experienced in years. Brooke, for her part, had built a career as a real estate investor prior to meeting Charlie, a comparatively low-profile professional background that stood in contrast to the entertainment industry careers both of Charlie's previous wives had pursued, and one that meant she entered into their relationship with considerably less prior experience navigating the intense media scrutiny that inevitably came with being married to one of television's most famous and closely watched actors. Despite that outward optimism, the marriage carried its own particular set of practical challenges from the very start, given how quickly it had followed the conclusion of Charlie's highly publicized conflict with Denise Richards, leaving relatively little time for either Charlie or Brooke to fully process the lessons of his previous marriage before beginning an entirely new one. Friends of the couple later suggested that this compressed timeline, moving from one significant relationship directly into the next, without much space in between, may have contributed to some of the underlying strain that would eventually surface so dramatically on that Christmas morning in Aspen. That happy domestic picture collapsed with shocking speed. In the early morning hours of December 25th, 2009, an argument broke out between Charlie and Brooke at their home in Aspen, Colorado. According to the police affidavit filed after the incident, Brooke told her husband that she wanted a divorce and intended to seek custody of their children, a statement that, according to her account to police, sent Charlie into a rage. Brooke told investigators that Charlie held a knife to her throat and told her she had better be afraid, along with additional threats reportedly involving hired individuals who could carry out harm without leaving any trace. The specific language contained within the police affidavit, detailing threats involving former law enforcement contacts capable of carrying out harm undetected, struck many who followed the case as an especially chilling escalation compared to Charlie's previous, more publicly documented conflicts with Denise Richards. Charlie was arrested that same day, Christmas morning, on suspicion of menacing second-degree assault, criminal mischief, and domestic violence, and was released after posting an $8,500 bond. He denied threatening to kill his wife, telling police that the two had argued, but that he had become upset specifically because of what he described as prior painful experience with divorce and custody battles, a clear reference to his earlier conflict with Denise Richards. Both spouses checked into treatment programs in the aftermath of the incident, and within about a week of the arrest, both Charlie and Brooke publicly expressed a desire to reconcile, appearing together in an Aspen courtroom the following February, where they embraced after a judge modified the restraining order that had kept them apart. That public display of reconciliation, arriving so soon after such a serious and frightening allegation, generated its own wave of skepticism among observers who questioned whether the underlying issues within the marriage could genuinely be resolved that quickly. That attempted reconciliation, however, would not hold, and the case against Charlie continued moving through the legal system even as the couple tried to repair their relationship, setting the stage for a formal resolution that would arrive later that same year, alongside an entirely separate scandal that would once again place Charlie's chaotic personal life squarely in the national spotlight. Guilty pleas and a hotel room scandal. In August of 2010, Charlie pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of misdemeanor assault in connection with the Christmas Day incident, a plea deal that allowed him to spend additional time in a Malibu treatment facility called Promises, rather than serving time in jail. As part of the arrangement, he was placed on probation and required to complete 36 hours of domestic violence counseling. In a public statement following the plea, Charlie expressed a desire to comply with the court's decision and move forward with his life. That plea deal, while resolving the criminal case against him, did little to fully repair the relationship between Charlie and Brooke, and the underlying tensions that had fueled the Christmas Day confrontation continued simmering beneath the surface of their marriage, even as both of them technically moved forward with the terms of the legal resolution. Colleagues who worked with Charlie during this period, including on the set of his hit television show 2.5 Men, later described a man who seemed to be managing an enormous amount of personal turmoil even as he continued reporting to work and delivering his role week after week. That professional consistency, maintaining one of the most demanding and lucrative roles on American television, even amid such significant personal chaos, would eventually come to an end entirely within just a few months, when a series of erratic public interviews and an escalating conflict with the show's creator led to Charlie's dismissal from the very series that had, at that point, made him the highest-paid actor on television. That resolution, however, did not mark the end of the turmoil surrounding Charlie's personal life that year. Just 2 months later, in October of 2010, police were called to a room at the Plaza Hotel in New York City to respond to what officers described as an emotionally disturbed individual. Charlie was hospitalized afterward for what his representative described as an adverse reaction to medication. The situation carried an added layer of complication given the surrounding circumstances. Denise Richards and their 2 daughters happened to be staying in a separate suite at the very same hotel at the time, while inside Charlie's own room was adult film actress Capri Anderson. That particular detail, the collision of his second ex-wife and daughters staying under the same roof as the unfolding scandal involving another woman entirely, struck many entertainment journalists covering the story as an almost surreal encapsulation of just how tangled and chaotic Charlie's personal life had become by that point in his career. On November 1st, 2010, both Charlie and Brooke filed for divorce, each seeking joint custody of their twin sons. Charlie listed the date of their separation as December 25th, 2009, the day of the Aspen altercation, even though the two had continued their on-and-off attempts at reconciliation for months afterward, a detail that reflected the considerable legal and financial complexity involved in formally untangling a marriage that had continued in some form well past its most publicly documented crisis point. Financial records connected to the divorce revealed that Charlie had agreed to pay Brooke $55,000 per month in child support, along with additional funds to maintain their shared home and a lump sum payment exceeding $750,000, figures that reflected both the considerable wealth Charlie had accumulated during his years as television's highest-paid actor and the genuine complexity of untangling a marriage that had involved substantial shared assets and ongoing childcare responsibilities for their young twin sons. Their divorce was finalized in 2011, but the end of the marriage was far from the end of the difficulties between them, and the years that followed would bring an entirely new set of struggles, this time centered not on Charlie's own behavior, but on Brooke's, struggles that would ultimately place their young twin sons, directly in the middle of an escalating crisis, a custody crisis rooted in addiction. In the months following their divorce, Brooke Mueller's own struggles with substance dependency became increasingly public and increasingly severe. In March of 2011, social services removed Bob and Max from Charlie's home after Brooke obtained a restraining order against him, a legal maneuver that added yet another layer of complexity to an already chaotic co-parenting arrangement between two parents, each dealing with their own serious personal struggles. At the time of that removal, Charlie had reportedly been living with adult film actress Brie Olson, a relationship that itself drew considerable media attention given the timing, arriving so soon after his highly publicized divorce from Brooke and his earlier hotel scandal involving Capri Anderson. That relationship with Olson would prove short-lived, ending within about a month of the boys being removed from the home. In the years that followed, Charlie continued a pattern of high-profile, often short-lived relationships, including a period publicly linked to adult film actress Georgia Jones, beginning in January of 2013, and a subsequent engagement to former adult film star Brett Rossi that began in February of 2014 and ended just 8 months later, in October of that same year, when the two mutually agreed to end their engagement. That relatively rapid succession of high-profile relationships throughout his 40s reflected a pattern that had, by that point, followed Charlie for the better part of 2 decades, moving quickly from one significant connection to the next, rather than spending extended time single between relationships. Colleagues and friends who observed this period of his life often noted that the pattern seemed less about any deliberate romantic strategy and more about a genuine discomfort with solitude, a trait that some who studied his broader personal history connected back to the instability of his earlier years navigating fame, addiction, and the collapse of his first 2 marriages in such rapid succession. Later that same year, Brooke was arrested in Aspen, Colorado, on suspicion of third-degree assault and cocaine possession with intent to distribute, after police responded to a report that she had assaulted another woman at a nightclub. She posted an $11,000 bond and was released from custody, but the arrest underscored just how serious her ongoing struggles with drugs had become in the aftermath of her marriage to Charlie. Around this same period, reports emerged of Brooke engaging in what was described as a cocaine binge lasting an entire week, during which she reportedly attempted to pawn jewelry for cash and initially refused to submit to a court-mandated drug test connected to her custody agreement with Charlie. That refusal, according to multiple reports at the time, was directly connected to the extended binge itself, since a positive drug test would have provided clear evidence of exactly the kind of relapse that could jeopardize her custody arrangement with the twins. As Brooke's struggles continued, Charlie sought custody of their twin sons, while she returned to treatment once again, a pattern of alternating custody transfers and treatment stays that would continue in various forms over the following several years, as both parents worked to manage the ongoing instability surrounding the children's care. Reports from that period described surveillance footage reportedly showing Brooke attempting to sell jewelry for cash during one particularly difficult stretch, a detail that underscored just how severe her financial and personal struggles had become as her addiction continued to escalate despite repeated attempts at treatment. The situation grew serious enough that, in May of 2013, Bob and Max were placed into the temporary custody of Denise Richards, Charlie's second wife and the mother of his 2 daughters, a decision that Charlie himself supported. That arrangement, unusual as it might have seemed to outside observers, reflected a level of practical cooperation between 2 of Charlie's ex-wives that stood in genuine contrast to the years of bitter, headline-generating conflict that had otherwise defined so much of his relationship history. For a period, Denise effectively became the primary caretaker for 4 of Charlie's 5 children simultaneously, her own two daughters, alongside Charlie's twin sons, from an entirely different marriage. A genuinely unusual blended family arrangement that spoke to the practical, if unconventional ways this particular extended family found to manage crisis after crisis over the years. Despite everything that had happened between them, Charlie and Brooke ultimately maintained a working friendship in the years that followed, one built around their shared responsibility for raising their twin sons, even after the marriage itself had long since ended. Brooke would later speak publicly about her gratitude for the co-parenting relationship the two of them had eventually managed to build, describing Charlie as a genuinely caring and involved father to their sons, despite everything the two of them had been through together. But as difficult as those years of custody battles and addiction struggles had been, an entirely different and even more consequential revelation was still waiting in Charlie's future, one that would finally come to light in the fall of 2015. The announcement that changed everything. By 2015, rumors had already begun circulating in tabloid media, suggesting that Charlie was living with a serious, undisclosed health condition. Reports first surfaced in a supermarket tabloid, following what its editors described as an extensive 18-month investigation into his personal life. And the story quickly gained enough traction that mainstream news organizations began covering the speculation directly rather than waiting for any official confirmation from Charlie himself. On November 17, 2015, Charlie confirmed those rumors directly, appearing on NBC's Today program to announce publicly that he was HIV positive. He explained that he had first been diagnosed approximately 4 years earlier, in 2011, after experiencing a series of severe headaches that had initially left him fearing he had a brain tumor. He described the sensation of finally hearing the diagnosis as one of the more difficult moments of his entire life, acknowledging that absorbing those 3 letters represented a genuine turning point that reshaped how he understood his own future. Charlie explained that he had chosen to come forward with the diagnosis, in part because he had, for years, been paying substantial sums of money to individuals who had threatened to expose his condition publicly unless he complied with their financial demands, a form of extortion that he said had ultimately depleted significant portions of his fortune. Rather than continuing to live under that ongoing threat, he described his decision to disclose his status publicly as an attempt to finally free himself from what he called a kind of prison. When directly asked whether he had transmitted the virus to any of his sexual partners, Charlie stated emphatically that doing so would have been impossible, explaining that he had always disclosed his status to partners before engaging in any sexual activity with them. That particular claim carried real legal weight given the laws in place in California, where he lived at the time, since knowingly engaging in unprotected sexual activity without disclosing an HIV-positive status to a partner could, under state law, constitute a criminal offense. The revelation connected directly back to his relationship with Brooke Mueller as well, with earlier tabloid reporting claiming that Brooke had suggested Charlie may have potentially exposed her to the virus during their marriage, allegations that added yet another layer of complexity and public scrutiny to an already difficult chapter of both of their lives. Those specific claims were never substantiated through any formal legal proceeding, but they nonetheless became part of the broader public narrative surrounding Charlie's diagnosis in the months following his announcement. In the years following his diagnosis, Charlie spoke more publicly about the physical toll of managing his condition, describing the difficult side effects of some of his earlier HIV medications, including persistent migraines and periods of cognitive difficulty that doctors attributed to a combination of his medication regimen and his own history of substance abuse. He later described switching to an experimental treatment that reportedly improved his symptoms considerably, offering some relief from the years of physical strain that his original medication regimen had placed on his body. That public disclosure marked a genuine turning point in how Charlie approached both his health and his broader public image, closing out one of the most turbulent chapters of his adult life, even as the consequences of his earlier marriages and relationships continued to unfold in the years that followed. Where the story stands today. In the years since his HIV disclosure, Charlie has spoken about working to build a quieter, more stable life, describing himself as sober since 2017 and expressing a desire to leave behind the chaos that had defined so much of his earlier adult years. He has continued to work intermittently within the entertainment industry, taking on smaller television and film roles in the years since his most publicly chaotic period, a considerably more modest professional profile than the one he held during his years as the highest paid actor on American television. His relationships with his own children, however, have not always followed a straightforward path toward reconciliation. His daughter, Sammy, from his marriage to Denise Richards, chose to live with her father for a period beginning in 2021, though she later revealed in 2025 that she had gone as long as a year without speaking to him and 6 months without exchanging any text messages at all. A reminder that even years removed from his most turbulent public chapters, Charlie's relationships with the people closest to him have often remained genuinely complicated. That pattern, periods of closeness followed by extended stretches of distance and silence, has continued to characterize Charlie's relationships with several of his 5 children over the years, reflecting the lasting impact of a childhood spent navigating multiple households, multiple divorces, and the near constant public scrutiny that came with being raised by one of the most talked about men in Hollywood. His other children, including his eldest daughter Cassandra from his relationship with Paula Prophet and his daughter Lola from his marriage to Denise Richards, have each navigated their own particular version of that same complicated dynamic, some maintaining closer, more consistent contact with their father over the years than others. A genuinely varied pattern of relationships that reflects just how differently each of Charlie's 5 children experienced growing up as part of his sprawling, headline-generating extended family. Reflecting on his own romantic life in more recent interviews, Charlie has described his current existence as remarkably quiet and uneventful compared to the decades that preceded it, telling one interviewer in 2025 that his romantic life had settled into something close to complete stillness after so many years of turmoil. Despite that quieter present, Charlie has indicated he remains open to the possibility of new romantic connection in the future, even if he has expressed considerably more hesitation about the prospect of a fourth marriage specifically, suggesting that the lessons learned across 3 previous marriages, each one beginning with genuine hope and ending amid its own particular brand of crisis, have left him considerably more cautious about formally committing to marriage again should the right relationship happen to come along. That caution, arriving only after decades of headline-generating relationships and 3 separate trips down the aisle, represents perhaps the most meaningful shift in Charlie's approach to romance in his adult life. A hard-won recognition that the pattern he had followed for so many years, moving quickly and impulsively into commitment, had rarely served him or the women involved particularly well over the long run. Looking back across the full arc of Charlie Sheen's romantic history, from a whirlwind 6-week courtship that produced a marriage lasting barely 6 months, to a second marriage that dissolved into years of bitter custody litigation, to a third marriage marked by a Christmas Day knife threat, an arrest, and an eventual custody crisis rooted in addiction, a clear pattern emerges of a man whose immense professional success ran in constant, often painful contrast to a personal life defined by volatility and crisis. Each of his 3 marriages began with genuine hope and public declarations of happiness, and each one, in its own particular way, ultimately became a headline the public simply could not look away from. That contrast between a professional career built on discipline, memorized dialogue, and hitting marks on a soundstage week after week, and a personal life that so often felt entirely improvised and out of control, remains one of the most consistent threads running through Charlie's entire public story. One that continues to shape how audiences understand him even now, decades removed from his most turbulent years in the spotlight. Today, Charlie maintains relationships of varying closeness with each of his three ex-wives and continues to co-parent his five children, navigating a family history shaped as much by addiction, public scandal, and genuine personal struggle as by the extraordinary fame that first brought him into the public eye as a teenager. It remains, even now, one of the more unusual and closely followed personal histories in modern Hollywood, a story that stretches from a Christmas morning arrest in the mountains of Colorado to a hospital room shared with a porn star in Manhattan, and finally to a quiet, hard-won attempt at stability that took Charlie the better part of 3 decades to reach. For a man who once seemed to generate a fresh headline nearly every week, that current chapter of relative quiet stands as its own kind of remarkable achievement, one built not on any single dramatic turning point, but on the slow, ongoing work of simply staying steady year after year in a life that had rarely offered him that particular luxury before. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating stories.